Welcome back, everybody, to this reading vlog I'm doing of The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Bakker. Let me know if you're reading along with me, and many of you out there I do know have already read this book and are interested in my opinion for some reason, but we are talking about chapter 4, which is also titled Sumna, I'm not quite sure, something in that realm. But this chapter scared me because there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of preamble, if you want to call it that. There's a lot of stuff at the beginning, and once you get past all of the like little excerpts and stuff, that's when I got scared, because the holy war of the Inrithi against the Fanim was declared by Mathanet, the 116th Shra of the Thousand Temples, and on and on and on. All of his titles, what year it happened in, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. Exposition upon exposition. I felt like I was reading Foundation by Isaac Asimov for a second, but then thankfully we get mid-spring 411 year. So that is a familiar heading that we're used to seeing. And we find ourselves in a new perspective, a new POV, and that is Esmenet. I really enjoyed this the scene because it was, again, more quiet, reflective character moment where Esmenet is kind of thinking about her daughter at first. She's thinking about her daughter because Achamian is reminded, or she reminds Achamian of her daughter. They were at some kind of bazaar or something, some market, and her daughter was infatuated with apples, I believe, but they were too expensive. And this memory is triggered by Achamian. I think he's like sniffing a prune or something. But she notes how long had Achamian stayed with her now. Many mornings she would lie awake listening to the hideous sounds of him making mud in her pot. That's a great laugh out loud moment. This book has been incredibly serious, incredibly dramatic. One could argue melodramatic, probably in this chapter, at least with some of the interior thoughts. I felt like they were, I don't know. It's tough for me in plots because to get really invested until the characters are fully fleshed out. I feel like Baker's been doing some good character work with Achamian and as well as side characters, but when we get into the internal thoughts, the direct thoughts, which I'm not a huge fan of. If you guys are new to my channel, you'll know that I criticize fantasy a lot for doing that, because I'm constantly hearing voiceovers. Like when you're watching a film and you hear a voiceover, you're kind of rolling your eyes. Well, that happens a lot to me in fantasy, but let us move on to this hilarious scene. He started calling it his morning apocalypse. So yeah, Achamian is having some bowel problems, even though he is assuring her that a clean bowel is very welcome and it's very important. So I got a kick out of that. I really like to see that Bakker is, despite all the seriousness, he has some levity in this chapter, because I think this is the first remotely funny or light section that's been so far, and we are about 150 or so pages into this thing. But in the midst of strangers, Achamian always looks so lonely, so misunderstood. No one, she would often think, knows him the way I do. Returned to her even though he had gold enough to buy a far younger horse. So they have this arrangement, I guess. It's a relationship. They love each other. She's contemplating that love, thinking like, you know, maybe justifying it to a degree, because she is a whore. She is a harlot. And she notes here that he could afford anybody, but he continually goes back to her. So it must be something more. And I like this passage right here when she's, again, reflecting more. Theirs was a strange marriage, if it could be called that. A marriage of outcasts, sanctified by inarticulate vows, a sorcerer and a whore. Perhaps a certain desperation was to be expected of such unions, as though that strange word, love, became profound in proportion to the degree one was scorned by others. But then what happens next, and Rao shows up and he says, I've learned something important. What has he learned? Well, he's learned that the Scarlet Spires have agreed to join the Holy War. Again, a faction joining Holy War. I'm not quite sure the gravity of it, but anyway, they talk about it at length. But the next part is when Esmenet is thinking about these stones that can destroy sorcerers, and she's comparing it to the stones that are, you know, thrown at whores, right? So more biblical stuff we're dealing with here. Ecclesiastical law dictated that prostitutes, like adulteresses, be punished by stoning. The same, she reflected, was true of sorcerers, except there was just one kind of stone that could afflict them, and it need touch them only once. Thankfully, there were few trinkets. The world, on the other hand, was filled with stones for harlots. Great reflection there. I really enjoyed that. So then what happens next? Well, then Akamian tells Inrao, you must get closer to Mythonet. Because why? Because he is too canny to what he seems. Now we have another split chapter. Late spring, 4110, Year of the Tusk, Sunma. And I noted this first opening paragraph because it was painting such an interesting picture. This is the cool stuff I love in fantasy. Rain, if a city was old, really old, the gutters and pools would always glitter black, sodden by the detritus of ages. Sumna was ancient, her waters like pitch. So this is when we find that Inrao is, he's trying to get to Mamanet. He's trying to sneak in there. He's been all covert. We also learned that his name is Paro, P-A-R-O, or Pero. Maybe we've seen that before. I do not remember, though. But then also, Inrao has a memory, right? Those times when the clouds had grown dark and his father, heaving the silvery fish from the sea, had refused to return to the village. So we have a connection, right? We have a connection to Akamian because we know that he grew up in a fishing village. But what does he do? He's sneaking around. He's trying to do some covert action, I guess. And he had found his grotto in the shrine of Onkus. Onkus, the singer in the dark. But then he hears something. Hears someone, right? And this is... I regretted looking this creature up because I'm going to put a very hilarious photo up here that is forever emblazoned on my mind when I see these things. But it stood a short distance away, perched on the railing, watching him with shiny blue eyes. It had the body of a crow, but its head was small, bald, and human, about the size of a child's fist. Stretching thin lips over tiny, perfect teeth, it smiled. So this thing was fucking creepy. When I pictured this in my head, I did not picture the image that I'm going to put up here right now, but something far more creepy, maybe not exactly human, but human-like, with maybe skin the same color as the feathers. I don't know, but I pictured something incredibly different. But then who shows up as well? Sarkellus. His name is Cutius Sarkellus. He is there too, the Knight Commander consorting with a consort Synthes. So these Synthes, really cool monsters, just don't look... Well, I already ruined it for you. I'm sure you guys have seen this image anyway. But you can see the mark of sorcery now, the scar tissue of the Kents, used to bind someone's soul to the abominable vessel before him. How had he missed it? So he's making note of what this thing is. So what happens next is we get some serious Temple of Doom action, kind of kung fu. It's almost like he's a monk or something, but turning with sorcerer's speed, he punched 2 fingers through Mujanish. Oh yeah, I forgot. Mujanish is there. His chainmail cracked his breastbone, then seized his heart. He yanked his hand free, drawing a cord of glittering blood into the air. That's pretty cool. That's pretty hardcore. Then, as though spilling from a bladder, his face simply fell apart, dropping outward, unclutching. I like that word in that context, unclutching, italicized with a ... ellipses. But Korai, in his other hand, whisked it over Inrao's cheek, so he is getting attacked by one of these trinkets that Esmenet called them, the ones that can destroy the sorcerer. Monumental rage filled him. It didn't understand. It didn't understand. With a coughing roar, he lurched forward, yanking his hair from his scalp. Okay, I didn't get that. I did not get what the hell... Whose scalp is it? Are we saying that the Synthes has a head of hair? Because I must have missed that. I always pictured this thing being bald. No, it was definitely bald, so he lurched forward, yanking his hair from his scalp. His and his. That's a little bit difficult for me to parse as far as what's going on here. But what happens next? Well, he falls. With a single outstretched hand, Paro Inrao followed a pillar to the earth. So he's like, freeze frame, right? Or fade to black, which is going to bring us to Part 2, the Emperor. So I'm guessing we're going to be talking about a new character now. So that chapter, pretty decent. I really like the POV shift to Esmenet. I think it's great to get a counter perspective, to see Akamian from the outside, because so far we've really only been seeing him from the inside, with the exception of when, what's his face, Nazarau or something like that. He was watching him from the parapets, but just walk away. We haven't really got a good sense of his personality from a different perspective. So it was cool to see that. And Rao unleashes some crazy monk stuff, faces this Synthes thing that looks like a man head with and a raven, but bald. And then he gets attacked. He gets jacked by this Korai thing, and he is falling as the pillar falls. So overall, interesting chapter. Scared me at first because of all the exposition, all of the history stuff. And I know that Bakker is really into history or he's trying to convey a very deep history. However, I do not read fiction for history. I think world building is great. Just do it sparingly. Do it in such a way where it feels realistic. Don't give me these crazy, crazy long chapter intros with just so-and-so beget so-and-so beget so-and-so. Again, I know, but one of you out there said, I can't remember who it was, forgive me for misremembering, but you said that the two books that he had by his side, Bakker, that is, was the Bible and Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. So you can tell that he's definitely leaning heavy into this. I would say that his writing isn't quite as poetic as Cormac McCarthy, not really even close. He's a pretty good writer, but it's kind of tough to say about the voice distinctions. I always talk about this a lot when I talk about writing and reading books and characters, is that when a character is not just speaking in dialogue, but when they're observing things, when we're seeing the world through their eyes, it should feel like someone else. Now, again, all of these people kind of feel samey in that regard, with the exception of, I guess, their relationships to each other and how they are in conversations and stuff like that. But anyway, we're very early into this book. I wrapped part 1, so I'm excited to see what is coming next. The only thing that worries me is it's called The Emperor, which to me means a lot of throne rooms, maybe, a lot of talking, a lot of politics. So that's really not my favorite part about fantasy. I love the part where Rao is just kind of sneaking around with these old pitted floors where you have all kinds of black, goo and the rain coming down and this little fight at the end. So it was cool to see some action finally. But I will quit rambling. I know I'm trying to keep these things short, and based on my clock here, it's going a little bit too long. So as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next video with part 2.